Thank you so much, Lars. We really need people just like him to help drive talent and creative people into the gaming industry to keep it thriving. For our next talk, we are super chuffed to have managed to get the next two speakers to join us. We have been hearing their names and getting their feedback from the event for the past few years. Games for Change is a beautiful team from New York who are taking game development to the next level. They're integrating it with our learning, our healthcare, our daily routines, and making just the mundane tasks of life a little bit easier and much more interesting. Susanna and Dalton will be exploring the positive power of digital games right now.
Hello, everyone. My name is Susanna Pollack, and I'm the president of Games for Change. I'm really excited to be connecting with you today from halfway around the world, from New York City, at this year's Africa Games Week. Before I hand the mic over to Dalton Gray, our lead game designer and facilitator, I thought I would share a little bit about the organization I run and the work we are doing around the world. So Games for Change, the not-for-profit, was founded in 2004 with a small gathering of 14 people. And they were game designers and they were researchers in a basement in an office building here in the city. They had a simple premise that games could have a power beyond entertainment. Our mission is the same now as it was back then, to empower game creators and social innovators to drive real-world change using games that help people to learn, to improve their communities, and to contribute to make the world a better place. So let's fast forward to 2020, and now we have a community of thousands of people around the world who agree with this simple premise. Games can be a driver for social good. And with over 3 billion people playing games globally, imagine the positive impact we could have. So what's unique about Games for Change and our community is that we welcome participation from sectors across industry, policy, and education. While we work actively with game studios of all sizes, our community is also comprised of NGOs and foundations, startups and telecommunication companies, researchers and academia, as well as policymakers and government agencies. It's a big tent approach as we advocate for the use of games to drive impact in education, healthcare, and to drive humanitarian issues. In addition to celebrating and growing the community with our annual Games for Change Festival, we also foster the ideas and resources through workshops and consulting projects with mission-driven organizations. We are also committed to incubating new projects through our game design challenges and through executive production. So we have a games design challenge happening right now, and I want to tell you about it because I hope that you might want to participate. So through a game design competition called STEM the Game, we are inviting all game creators to bring their talent and creativity to the educational tech community. We are looking for developers to submit a completed or beta version of an entertainment-first or commercially viable game, along with a proposal on how that game could be reimagined to engage with and inspire learners around STEM topics. And by STEM, I mean science, technology, engineering, and math. So what the challenge aims to do is to help raise the bar on the quality of STEM games by adapting commercial games for learning purposes. So if you have a commercial game that you've developed, but you think it might appeal to young people across one of those subjects, science, technology, education, or math, please consider applying for this opportunity, because ultimately 1 to 3 finalists will be selected to participate in a 5-month program and win up to $150,000 US. The deadline is January 4th in 2021. So if you can go to our website at gamesforchange.org, you'll be able to find out more. So while the Games for Change is headquartered in the United States, we are excited to see our community growing around the world. We have chapters in Latin America and Europe, both of which run their own Games for Change festivals. And we've just announced a partnership to bring Games for Change to the Asia Pacific region, starting with Australia. Perhaps through meeting great people like all of you that are watching, we can explore how we can grow a Games for Change community in Africa. That is what I hope. So that's it for me for the moment. I'm going to pass you over to Dalton, who's going to talk a little bit about our learning about our methodology and how to create social impact games. And as you as designers might want to think about this field as a way to apply your strengths and your talents, as we know we would love to be working with you. So over to you, Dalton, and thank you.
Hello, and thank you so much. I am so honored to be representing Games for Change here at Africa Games Week, and I'm excited to talk to you about the positive power of digital games. So this is going to be a talk that's aimed at you if you're a game designer, or if you're a developer, or if you're involved on a team, whatever role you play in the games industry. I hope that you find something in this talk that is valuable to you, whether that's a new appreciation for what games can do and how you might be able to make them, or if it's just some interesting games to check out that you didn't know existed. I hope everybody can get something out of this talk. I know that it won't apply to necessarily everybody, but all right, let's dive in. So, quick little about me. So who am I? My name is Dalton Gray. I am the lead game designer and facilitator at Games for Change, and my history is a little funky. So I got my start in games at the Institute of Play. This is a game-based learning educational nonprofit based in New York City. Sadly, it's no longer in existence, but all of their resources are available online with the Connected Learning Alliance, so you can check them out there. Institute of Play was where I worked as a game designer on 2 different educational experiences, or educational digital games. The first was Operation Reach. It was about military children and raising awareness about mental health among a very specific population. I worked on a socio-emotional learning suite of games for middle school classrooms, and I got to work with dozens of educators on using the game design process as part of their curriculum design and bringing educational games into their classroom. From there, I worked at a startup that put massive local multiplayer games on very large shared screens. So I worked as a game designer there, I worked as a producer, I headed up business development for a little bit, and was actually able to get our experiences onto some very, very large sports screens, which was a lot of fun. That was ESC Games. Personally, I lead a troupe of artists and creatives called the Adventure Society, and we explore games through the lens of theater. So here are some of our experiences that are more analog or physical. And I'm working with on an educational game with a professor from Columbia Business School about this game. Functionally is a mega game, so it's lots and lots of people, if you've ever played a mega game or heard of Watch the Skies, but it's for use in his negotiation classroom as a leadership development and team building activity. Of course, I work at Games for Change. If you are not familiar with Games for Change, we are the leading advocate for the use of games and XR as drivers of social change. So Games for Change does not necessarily make a game, we're not a game studio, right? But we advocate for games that affect social change, games that have an impact goal in the world in some way. And we have programs that create pathways for either developers or students who are interested in game design or impact game design. We help them connect with resources and skill up and get better at what they do. Some of those programs, so the first thing that you may be familiar with the Games for Change from, we have an annual festival that is a convening of amazing minds in games and in multiple different industries of impact. XR for Change is a big pillar of the organization, supporting and raising awareness about XR applications for social impact. And we have a national student challenge that reaches students from coast to coast in the United States and gets them building games for impact. So the goals for this talk, what are we going to do? I want to just define for everybody here and maybe put out one definition among many of what games for impact are, right? What are games for impact? Sometimes they're called serious games, sometimes they're called games for change or games for social impact, right? Like what types exist and what are they? And then I'm going to share a methodology that you can follow and use and steal from in your own practice to make games for impact, right? Okay, so let's start with typology. So what do we mean when we mean impact games? Like I said, this is one definition of many. There are many different ways to break this down. We find it helpful to think about 6 different types of impact games. So the first is learning, right? We already talked about Institute of Play and making games for educational spaces. You can make a game that transfers knowledge, right? That educates people, that engages students and gets them to think about subject matter in a different way. Second type of impact game, right? A game that raises awareness. And so you can use a game to spread the word about a social issue, to raise awareness and donations, right? Social movements, you can use games to bring people together that wouldn't otherwise be connected, or to catalyze a movement or a group of people into some form of action. And you can use a game for citizen science, right? So this is crowdfunding the research, crowdfunding lots of research through the resource that you have as a game designer, which is your audience's attention, right? Behavior change, right? Games can actually change the way that we live our lives and change some of the core beliefs that we have about ourselves and about the world around us, and can be used to make positive impacts on somebody's life. And then finally, cognitive training. So this last one is very exciting. Just this year, the FDA in the United States approved a game-based intervention as a prescription for children with ADHD. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but now I just want to dive into each of these a little bit further. So iCivics is a great example of a learning game. It's very, very popular here in the United States. It's used in social studies classrooms from coast to coast in all 50 states. And what it does is it has a series of different games and exercises that analyze the role of government and allow students to have agency in that conversations. Whereas before, social studies classroom was sort of like a one-way broadcasted thing, right? Kind of like what I'm doing now. I would love to engage with you. Unfortunately, I can't be there. But iCivics creates this opportunity for kids to have interaction and engagement in that discussion of what the government is and social studies. Their reach is massive. So they have over 7 million students, 72,000 teachers use the platform. Over half of the students that play in class continue playing at home. And so this is one of the really powerful things that games for education have, is that you can earn attention and maintain a conversation with a student and build on concepts using that engagement in a way where the student is driving it, right, and coming back to the game. So this is a really great example of what games for learning can be. We're going to talk about a couple of other examples throughout this talk. So let me move on here to games that raise awareness. So you may be familiar with Dumb Ways to Die. This was an advertising campaign in Australia to reduce injuries and incidents of like harm and death around rail crossings, right? So this was a game that was, I think the game came after the jingle. It was a really popular jingle. There were over 70 million people that played that game, and half of their target audience, while playing, actually pledged to be more safe around trains, right? The impact of this game and of this marketing campaign was such that it increased the recognition of rail safety in Melbourne. It also increased the company's popularity and gave them a PR boost because they did something innovative that actually got people's attention. It was something they wanted to participate in. Making Money is an example of a game that builds social movements, right? So this is an ARG, or an alternate reality game, that was developed for the people of Macon, Georgia, to bring them together, to help people interact with people that they wouldn't otherwise have seen on a daily basis, or to shop at a business that they hadn't shopped at before. The way the game worked is that everybody got half of a dollar bill, or half of this like Making Money bill, and they had to find somebody else who had the other half of it, and then put them together, and then they could go redeem them together at a site, and they would get money, or like making bucks that they could use at local businesses, right? So in the way the game was executed, 66% of the matches that came in or with people that players did not previously know. 63% of the matches were with people that the people would be very unlikely to meet with otherwise. And 46, just about half of the discount dollars that they got for playing the game were spent at businesses that were new to them. And of that, 92% went back to that business, right? So this is an example, a great example of how games embedded in reality can make a big change on people's lives, right? If you look at the power of what Niantic is doing with Pokemon Go, bringing people out and getting them to interact with people in different spaces in different ways is one of the powers that games have, right? Citizen science, so Fold It is probably the best example of a citizen science game for impact. In this game, players fold and unfold complex proteins that are actually based on real data that need to be processed by a human being, but they make puzzles and games out of that. All of the players' responses to those puzzles are then collected by actual scientists and used as actual research. And there's been some amazing outcomes from this project. One of them, I think that here, Time Magazine, when they wrote about Fold It in 2011, said that in 10 days, gamers helped unlock the structure of an AIDS-related enzyme that the scientific community has been unable to unlock for a decade. Right? So just in 10 days, if you get a whole bunch of people together all playing a game and you structure it right, you can actually have scientific outcomes that are hugely meaningful on the community. Behavior change. So Remission is one of the first games from Hope Labs, which now has a whole suite of games like this. Essentially, it's a game for young people with cancer who are going through cancer treatment to play to help get them back on their feet and help them stick to their medication regimen and maintain their mental health during an otherwise incredibly traumatic and hard time. This game actually had some brain research or some outcomes on neuroactivity, right? So key regions in the brain were activated when playing Remission, including neural structures involved in emotion and motivation and learning and memory, right? So this game actually reached into the pathways of how a person's brain was working and helped light up some different parts of their brain that they might not always, or might not have the ability to do so otherwise. Like I said, now this company is on doing some really amazing things. Their latest product is a chat bot that is a similar thing. It's a companion for people who are undergoing chemo and have been through cancer and they need to talk with somebody. And it's a little game that you can just talk to and work through these really traumatic, tough experiences. Endeavor RX. So this is the first and only, at the time, for now, game-based digital therapeutic. So this is a game specifically targeted for children with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. One of the interesting things about this is that they've been going through testing with this for about 7 years, and along the way, there are very minimal side effects, almost no side effects. The side effects that were mentioned on the study talk about things like frustration and like emotional distress because they're stressed out playing the game, and headaches and things from just like normally like looking at a screen for too long. But they're not taking a chemical that's potentially having many side effects, right? The thing that I want to call out here is that if you notice there's this little let me see if I can highlight this for you. Achille care, so this thing on the right. So the game itself is just the game, right? The game is for children to play in a regular way for their ADHD. But this game is situated in a more holistic practice, right? It's not just a game that's going to solve your problems. It's a game that also is linked up with clinician-directed therapy, medication, and or educational programs, right? So there are other approaches being done around the game. I don't want to call this just like a silver bullet. But one of the things that we're going to come back to a little bit later on in this talk is this little concept here, this little dashboard for Achille care. I want you to just put a pin in that in your head because we're going to come back to that in a little bit. Now, these were all examples of games that were impact games. They were designed to have social impact, but there are other ways for games to be impact games. So if you're familiar with Fortnite, They just released a creative mode this year, and teachers are now using Fortnite creative mode in their classroom, and the same way that you might have a student create a diorama or a poster. Now instead they get to use all of the physics and the sort of real world sandbox of Fortnite to tell their story and communicate their ideas, right? So this is entertainment first, impact later. One way to make an impact game. Another example of this is the Assassin's Creed franchise has a Discovery Tour series where it's all realistic depictions of ancient world settings. So Egypt and Greece are the two mentioned here. EVE Online, if you're familiar with this is a massive multiplayer online game where you operate like a mining corporation. It's huge. It's this like massive, expansive world. They have implemented citizen science challenges into their platform. So they've got all of these players that are engaged. They have all of their attention on a daily basis. They're looking for things to do to earn in-game currency. And the company behind it put out a number of citizen science projects where players could sort of participate in, similar to Fold It, right, a little puzzle or a little activity that actually goes straight into a body of research that scientists are using to achieve scientific outcomes. For COVID, because they had the system set up and they'd already done, I think, 2 sort of projects with it, they were able to put COVID data into EVE Online and give players an opportunity to chip away at this highly complex data to help get a vaccine out there and understand the virus. Another model for impact games is sort of a game-based intervention, right? So maybe using a game that isn't necessarily modified for impact in any way, right? It isn't designed for impact, but finding ways to use that game as a tool in something that is creating a social impact. So Block by Block is a UN-backed program that goes to underserved, impoverished communities around the world and uses Minecraft to engage the people living there in the redesign of public spaces. So when an architect goes to a spot that needs like a seawall or a place that's poorly lit and is dangerous for people to walk in at night, it's always been a problem to get people involved in those conversations in a way that is authentic, in a way that they have a real agency, because they're not going to know AutoCAD. They're not going to be able to sketch out their ideas using these kinds of tools, right? Minecraft is a really accessible way for somebody to participate in those sort of big picture conversations. And they have a history of just like amazing stories of going to different parts of the world and sort of asking people to redesign it using Minecraft blocks. So that's an example of a game-based intervention. There are many different versions of this. If you look at Minecraft Education or the way that Minecraft was used in education before Minecraft Education Edition sort of was released, that could be a game-based intervention. So here we have 6 different types of games for impact, or 6 different core focuses that impact games have, and we have 3 different ways to make an impact game. You could start out from the get-go and make a game for impact. You could repurpose a game that already exists for an intervention that has some social impact behind it, or you could do an entertainment first, impact later. You already have a popular game, you already have a player base, you already have a pipeline, right? Now find ways to leverage those resources for social good. One final thing I'll say on this, just as a reminder, this is not in any way the only way to think about these things, but I hope this unlocks something in your brain. Maybe you're a developer who is passionate about one of these categories of impact, or you're a designer or a publisher that's looking for these kinds of things, or looking for how to talk to people about it, right? And this might be helpful, useful tools for you. So why games? Why should games be used for social impact? They are hugely influential. So games are the most pervasive form of entertainment. There are over 3 billion hours a week spent playing video games. 9 billion hours a week are spent watching video games. So there's this whole other category of media that's being created around games. Financially speaking, the global estimate for 2020 of the games industry worldwide is $174 billion, which I believe is more than music and films put together. In 2019, that's up from 150 billion, right? So this is a massive industry with a lot of weight behind it. And games have this unique ability to exist across all of these different industries, right? Games are intersectional. So games can create conversations between journalists and scientists and retail in ways that other types of media would sort of struggle to. But games are, by their very nature, they involve so many different things. So they're really good at being intersectional. Impact games, if you're considering getting into developing games for social impact, there are ways to make money in this industry, right? Education technology is hugely profitable and it's growing. If we look at some shining stars as examples in this industry, Kidopia has over 5 million downloads, 300,000 subscribers, and their parent company is valued at $23.8 million. There's a huge market for specifically for this kind of a thing, right? Parents are looking for high quality media for their kids. Another educational example, ABC Mouse, their annual revenue is 103.6 million, right? So not everybody is going to be like this, right? I just put these on here because I think there's a conception that the only way to make a game for impact is either through grants or fundraising, and that they're not really profitable, but there are ways to actually make money on these things. One key industry to look at is digital healthcare. The type of what we're seeing in this space is just an explosion when digital technologies are being used as prescribed interventions and as support, and to help bring down the cost of specialist provider healthcare. We're going to see lots of activity in this space in the coming decade, from pain management, rehabilitation, visualizations, behavior modification. All of these things are starting to grow. So this is a really interesting space to get into as well. All right, so now we've talked about sort of why you would get into games, the different types of games for impact, right? Let's talk about how games for impact get made and what kinds of things you'd want to consider. So I'm going to share with you now this deep impact framework. So this is our framework for thinking about how you take a project from discovery to execution and beyond. The first step in this is discovery, right? So if you're familiar with the design process, this would be your research phase, or the beginning or the kickoff of a project. In the discovery step of the DEEP framework, it's all about identifying the problem you're trying to solve. So that problem, whatever problem you're setting your sights on, has a huge effect on what you end up doing in your game. You want to describe the problem, you want to understand your audience and their needs, you want to define your impact goals, and you want to tap into expert networks or subject matter experts, right? So let's get into this a little bit more deeply and talk about some of the different ways or tools that you could go through this step. So the first step is establishing an impact strategy. You want to ask yourself the following questions, right? So what is your impact thesis? What do you think is the change that you want to make? How do you think it's going to come together? What do you think the problem needs in order to be addressed? Does your game actually have the potential to transform or significantly improve lives, right? Is it going to be influential in accomplishing that thesis and making the change for the problem that you've set your sights on? Is your theory of impact grounded in evidence? So thinking about behavior change models, right? Or a theory of change. If you're trying to accomplish something, is there evidence behind how you're going about it? And this is going to depend on which sort of industry or type of change you're going after, right? So if you're trying to make a neurological change, there's a giant body of research that you need to get familiar with and pull into your game design to make sure that you're going through all of the steps to make the change you're trying to make, right? And that'll be a different body of research from something like education right? Which you're going to get into a whole different mess to try and really to stand on the shoulders of giants, right? There are people that have come before you in all of these different industries, and you can draw on that research and use that to accomplish your goals, right? Are your methods and assumptions around the evaluation and effectiveness valid, right? So if we're looking at your assessment strategy for each of those different industries, for each of those different sectors, it's going to be a different way that you're going to have to assess that. Assessing an educational intervention is very different than, like I said, assessing a neurological intervention, right? You'll need different technology. You'll need a completely different set of expertise and specialist skills. And then the game design itself, is it innovative? Is it building on the game's history in that vertical or in that type of change, right? Impact games are a great example of this because they've been around for a long time, or fitness games, sorry, are a great example of this because they've been around for a long time. We have, going back to Atari all the way through to the Ring Fit Adventure, right? And the final thing to ask yourself in this first step is, who are you in this equation? What role do you play? What role can or should you play? You don't want to get into a situation where you're designing something for people on the other side of the world or the other side of the country that you don't really have the context to get into, right? So all of this comes together into your impact promise, right? This is your promise that you're making between yourself and your users or your stakeholders or your playtesters, however many or few there are of them, right? This is something a contract that you're making a commitment to bind yourself in the game and say, this is what I'm really trying to do and say here. So thinking about this impact thesis, you want to be able to summarize the impact of your game in 1 to 2 sentences and how your game is addressing that problem. So for an example of what this might look like, if we're looking at an example fitness game, right? This is a really clear outcome. We want a game that helps players improve their fitness by walking and running and embracing an active lifestyle. This game will teach players about the benefits of walking and running, so teaching them and transferring knowledge about the importance of physical exercise, actually incorporating running and walking into their daily lives, so changing their behaviors, reinforcing the development of long-term sustainable walking, running habit, gamifying it or creating rewards or incentives to do it over time, and actually changing those beliefs. So if you're able to change the core belief rather than just having a sort of surface level change, right? If you can really change their subconscious beliefs about running, they're very likely to continue to run and incorporate fitness into their daily lives. As you're going through this process, you want to ask yourself if your theory of impact is evidence-based, right? And really think about what data is going to matter and be meaningful. Again, like going back to what are the standards of measurement in the industry that you're working in or heading towards, seeing if there's an existing body of evidence or research that you can draw from. And at the beginning of the project, you want to think about who are the experts that you could pull together, right? This is about team composition. What stakeholders? Do you want an assessment partner to come in? Do you need somebody who's actually in the field, or a researcher, or a physician, or a doctor that you can partner up with, right? The second step of the DEEP framework is execution, right? How do you design for a game with impact? So the 3 steps here are design with intention, diversify execution strategy, and diversify monetization. Let's get into some of that. The first step really is to consider context. So now we know what problem we're trying to solve. What is the context that this intervention is going to be working in? This is a game called Dermic VR. It's for children who are in hospital that either need to get vaccinated or they need to get shots, or they're otherwise going through a sort of painful or scary experience. VR is being used to sort of mollify them and make them feel more comfortable. But think about all of the crazy different things going on in that context, right? You've got multiple stakeholders that are in the room. You're in a very specific place. You're in like a hospital or a doctor's office. You've got someone who is potentially emotionally like aroused, right? It's like freaking out because they're afraid of getting a shot, or they've just went through something that's sort of scary, right? And you've got to somehow create something that when they put on that VR helmet makes it feel better, right? And you've got to design that whole experience. So think about context first and foremost. There we go. Impact and creative alignment. This is something that I think is often a pitfall of games for impact, right? Thinking that the game exists in one place and the impact exists in another, and they're two separately different things. I want to say to you right now that successful games think about the alignment between these two things really critically. As an example of that, we have this game that does not exist. It's a bad game. It's not coming to stores near you at any time. Local government, the game, right? So this game wants to fix the problem of apathy in local government, right? And the impact goal is to increase voter turnout. The audience is young families, right? So let's look at how they're going to do this. So this is a thought exercise, right? In a scenario, so we've got that impact promise is increasing engagement in local government, right? The creative promise for this game, users are going to play a game of chess, and every time they capture an opponent's piece, a pop-up is going to give them a factoid about the role of local government, right? So if we break this down on a user journey here, we've got you capture an opponent's pawn, you read a paragraph about local government, and then you move another piece on the board. If you're looking at what's motivating to you at this point, right? Why I'm playing the game is I want to win, I have pride, I want to beat my opponent, but then as soon as that pop-up comes up, I'm going to want to get back to the game as soon as possible, right? Why are you distracting me from the thing that I was already doing? Okay? So this is a non-example, right? It's a bad example of an impact game because the user behavior is not at all involved with the impact goals. The context is completely changing. The user is incentivized to disregard the content, get rid of it, and the content for impact is only offered in one modality. You're reading it and that's it. There's nothing else. You're not able to engage with it. You're not able to interact with it. It's totally not making a good use of game design, right? So this is what we might call chocolate-covered broccoli. This article is by a professor at University of Northern Colorado, Matt Farber, who uses games in his classroom and writes about the role that games can play in educational spaces. And this concept of chocolate-covered broccoli, this idea that there's the good stuff that we want people to engage with, the impact content, and then there's the delicious stuff, the game, which is engaging and fun. It's the chocolate, and you put them together and you hand it to somebody. But it doesn't work. People see right through it. They eat the broccoli they eat the chocolate off of the broccoli, and then they throw the broccoli away, right? So I want you to think about this. If you were in this position, if you're a game designer in this conference, what would you do differently? How could you better align this impact goal of getting people to think about the role of local government in their lives, or the role that government plays, and really embed it in a game design concept, right? I'm not there with you, but if there is a chat feature somewhere that maybe some intrepid game designers could throw some ideas and some people could respond to, that would be super cool. It could also not happen. That would be totally fine. But think about it. The final thing is to really think about your team composition. So making sure that you've got a diverse team. Diversity improves the resiliency and the overall effectiveness of any team. And everybody has blind spots, and if you only work with people who look exactly like you, you will more likely than not fall into this pitfall of not addressing a blind spot or not having some critical points of view and feedback that might be a little different than you, but are very valuable. So intentionally try to get a diverse team. Recruit developers that you haven't worked with or aren't working with already, or different other types of people for your team. All right, so then one thing I want to call out is that designing for non-player users. This might be new, right? So if you are a game designer or developer, you might only be designing for a player, right? But lots of games have these non-player users or different stakeholders that are involved in the success of the impact game, right? So examples are like educators and clinicians. Going back to Endeavor RX, this Achille Player Care platform is an online dashboard for the outcomes of a particular student or patient going through the treatment, right? And that's got to serve the clinician, it's got to serve the parents and the families, and they're going to have a wide variety of needs and wants that you'll have to be designing for, developing for, or just at least thinking about. This is also an opportunity, right? So if you were working on a game like this, what tools or platforms or domains of expertise that aren't already in your wheelhouse could be something that you could grab, right, and pull into your portfolio or your skill set. If you have a studio, what other tools or things could you be working on or working towards that you might not already have in your portfolio of skills? So one example of this is Finger Food. So Finger Food makes digital platforms and digital tools. They have made games, and they were a game studio using Unity, and they found ways to use Unity for visualizations for industry. And they have been very successful at that, and now they've been acquired by Unity for exactly that. Here, GMC's all-electric Hummer will be the first car with software built using Epic's Unreal Engine, right? So there are lots of ways that you could be using the tools you have to diversify your skill set and diversify the way that your studio is making money and creating opportunities and finding opportunities. And this all comes down to this concept of the double bottom line, right? So you are trying to make something that makes a profit, but equally as important is having a social impact. In the United States, we have this concept of a B corporation, right? Which is a corporation that has a stated social good that you're trying to make money and you can take on investments, you're a for-profit endeavor, but you have a goal that you're trying to accomplish. The final step the next step in the DEEP framework is to measure, evaluate, and optimize, right? So just like anything, if you're familiar with the marketing funnel, right, this is a tool that you can use to measure and optimize the effectiveness of marketing campaigns. If you haven't seen a marketing funnel before, users go from awareness through consideration to conversion. They buy your product and then referral, right? They tell other people about it. You can use a marketing funnel to track each of these steps across whatever campaigns you're running, right? So if you're running a website and you see that 1,000 people go to your website, but only 2 of them actually give you their email or sign up for more information, maybe there's something you could do to address that issue. If you have a social media campaign with 1,000 followers on it, and 250 of them click, a quarter of your followers click on an offer that you have or a promotion, but only 1 of those people actually make a purchase, right? That's an opportunity for you to think about what's happening at this step in the process. You can do this for your impact goals as well, and thinking about your assessment strategy. You want to develop an assessment strategy for both your marketing spend and how you're getting the game out there and how well it's performing as a game, but also how it's achieving those impact goals, and thinking about what are the goals that you set out, what's going to be your assessment strategy. Do you want to have a third-party evaluator come in? Are there known things that are already being tracked that you can be a part of? And the final step is to pay it forward, right? So find mentorship opportunities, connect with other developers or other game studios that are in impact. Come to the Games for Change Festival and give back, right? So this is how we grow this movement and create more games for impact and games for social good, and raise awareness about the use of games in these contexts. And so that is the Deep Games for Change Deep Framework. So I hope you found these tools or these prompts useful, and I hope you use them to make games for impact or modify the games you're already making for social impact, social good. And I want to thank you again for spending this time with me. I'm super duper honored to be here and represent Games for Change. I'm really excited about all of the other speakers at Africa Games Week, and I just want to thank you again. I hope you found this useful.